Dobro večer, polako ćemo početi s današnjom tribinom. Prvo ću pozdraviti našu gošću, švedsku aktivistkinju i feministkinju Kajsu Ekis Ekman. Kajsa Ekis Ekman je spisateljica, novinarka i aktivistkinja, rođena 1980. u Štokholmu. Napisala je 3 knjige, a njezina prva knjiga je Biti i biti kupljena, prostitucija, surogatstvo i podijeljeno ja. Ona uspoređuje seksualnu industriju i industriju surogat majčinstva, te kako oboje komodificiraju ženska tijela. Kritizira pojam seksualnog rada kao neobično savezništvo između neoliberalne desnice i postmoderne ljevice, koja se koristi za legitimiranje seksualne industrije. Ona također tvrdi, a to ćemo vjerujem i čuti, da sindikate za seksualne radnice u mnogim slučajevima financiraju makroji, države i akademici, a oni imaju vrlo malo veze sa radničkom borbom. Ukradeno proljeće opisuje kako je eurokriza utjecala na grčko gospodarstvo i predstavlja kritiku mjera štednje. Njezina najnovija knjiga o značenju spola objavljena je na švedskom, španjolskom i engleskom jeziku i bavi se teorijom rodnog identiteta i njezinim implikacijama za žene, djecu i homoseksualne osobe. Thank you very much for coming here and having a lecture for us. It will be very interesting and we are I think, very delighted to have you here. So thank you, Kajsa.
But I want to pass on to the subject of my most recent book on the meaning of sex, Thoughts on the New Definition of Woman. What do you want to ask questions now or should we take it later? Later? Okay. So, when I wrote this book on the meaning of sex, it was after years of hoping that somebody else would write this book. Because I knew that when I wrote it, I would get hell. And I was thinking like, somebody needs to say this, but I hope it's not going to be me. So I was like shadow writing the manuscript for a long time and thinking, I hope I can just delete it. But it didn't happen in my country that somebody wrote about this. So I said, okay, I'll just do it. So it came out of a necessity to talk about the subject of gender identity theory. Gender identity theory, when we meet it at first, we meet it like something beautiful. We meet it like a matter of tolerance. We're told that, this is just about diversity. We're told that this is about accepting everybody who they are. This is about being a good person as opposed to, bad people. Who wants to be a bad person? Let alone the fact that when we're saying this, good and bad, we sound like George W. Bush when going to war in Iraq, because, it's really a dichotomy of like, you're with us or against us, But nobody wants to be bad, so we want to be good. We hear that it's about people wanting to be themselves, that people who can finally be themselves. We hear a narrative that sounds like the gay rights movement. It's so identified with the gay rights movement that we think, this is just the same group, actually. This is just the next step in the gay struggle or in the feminist struggle. We're doing away with gender. We're doing away with all these old binary models, and we're moving into a place where everybody can be who they want to be. Like, who could be against that, possibly? So that's the level that most people get to. Most people in society that hear about this theory, they're just at that level. They will say, okay, this is just about that. Now, if we get a bit further into this theory, something else emerges. Something else like a very binary model, actually, where we're told that if a kid doesn't like to play with cars or to play football or to play fight, that kid is actually a girl. And if a kid doesn't like, to play with dolls, doesn't like dresses, that kid is actually a boy. So this kind of goes against the first layer, because in the first layer, it was all about, being who you really are, being tolerant, everybody should be who they are. And now we're being told that no, you either are a girl or a boy or in the middle, but all depends on certain stereotypes. And I want to read some extracts because when I was writing this book, I was studying like children's literature. And I found in my own library, I have a daughter who's turning 6, and in the books for children, there was the book translated into my language, a picture book for like 5, 6-year-olds called I Am Jazz. And it begins like this. For as long as I can remember, my favorite color has been pink. Now, what is the meaning of that sentence, for as long as I can remember, my favorite color has been pink? You know, it can mean nothing. Some people like pink, some people like orange, some people like gold. So what? But in this context, according to gender identity theory, this means that the person is a girl, the person is feminine, because pink, we're told, is a feminine color that only girls like. So it goes on. Most of all, I love mermaids. Sometimes I even wear a mermaid tail in the pool. My best friends are Samantha and Casey. We always have fun together. We like high heels and princess gowns or cartwheels and trampolines. But I am not exactly like Samantha and Casey. I have a girl brain, but a boy body. I was born this way. Right? So what are we told there is a girl brain? We're told that if you have a girl brain, you like pink, you like mermaids, you like high heels. Apparently, if you're a boy, you can't like these things. No good. Boys should not like high heels. That is the message. The book does not say that you're fine being a boy and liking high heels and liking dresses. The boy says that if you like that, you can't be a boy. No. So we read that Jazz has never liked cars. Never liked cars. Now, isn't that suspicious? If you're a boy, you don't like cars, what's wrong with you? Are you gay? No, we're told. We're told that some parents think, not in this book, but in a lot of other books about trans kids, we're told that some parents erroneously think that their kids are gay, but they're not. They're actually transgender and thus heterosexual. So we're told that Jazz has always preferred princess dresses, but his parents didn't allow him to wear princess dresses. They forced him to wear boys' clothes and were very confused when he didn't want to. At the age of 3, they went to see a doctor. Hold on. At the age of 3, they went to see a doctor? So because your son doesn't like cars, but likes pink and princess dresses, you go to a doctor, right? Now, what does that tell you? What is the implicit message here? The implicit message is that there's something wrong with a boy who doesn't like cars, and he needs to be taken to a doctor to be changed somehow. Now, the doctor spoke to my parents, and I heard the word transgender for the first time. Following the appointment, the parents changed the boy's name to Jazz and explained that he is now a she. As a she, Jazz is now allowed to wear girls' clothes and grow his hair out. And the book ends in the usual way that these books end. I'm happy, I'm having fun, I'm proud. Right? So this boy who's now gone through transition to be made into a girl, has been made like a super celebrity in the US. You know, at 6, he started a public battle to play football on the girls' team. At 14, he was among Time magazine's 25 most influential people. When he was 18, he had a reality show that showed his farewell party to his penis. And everybody was repeating the same story, that he's so happy. Now she is so happy, although Jazz reported not knowing what an orgasm was. Right? So what we're hearing here is a completely different story, I believe, than the one about tolerance. What we're hearing is a return to stereotypes, a return to extremely regressive stereotypes about what a girl is and what a boy is. Right? Something that we as feminists have been fighting against for as long as we can remember. We fought against those stereotypes. We fought for girls to be able to to act in any way they wanted to, for boys to be able to act in any way they wanted to, without being labeled tomboys or sissies or so on and so forth, right? So what is happening here in the theoretical sense? Now, I think there is a confusion when it comes to the word sex and gender. Sex, as we know, in feminist theory, used to refer to biology, to the kind of natural part, the unchangeable part about our situation, whereas gender referred to the kind of social construct around gender. Now, mind you, gender was not an individual personality. Nobody used to say 20 years ago that I had a gender, you had a gender. Gender was the structure. It was the structure of oppression. It was collective. It wasn't individual. It wasn't a personality trait. Gender was the word we use to denote everything that can be changed about sex. What we can't change is menstruation, is childbirth, is the way our bodies are. That's sex. What we can change, the dresses, the high heels, the lower wages that women get, the violence, the low representation in politics, that we used to call gender. We used to say that gender was something that we could change and sex was something we couldn't change, right? So then came queer theory. Now, I don't believe that queer is the same thing as trans, and I will explain why. So when queer theory came with Judith Butler in 1990, she explained that there was no difference between sex and gender, because she said sex was gender all along. It had always been gender. So even the body, even the things that we said you couldn't change, she said they're a matter of language, to simplify it. Maybe I'm doing violence to her theory by explaining it this way, but I kind of have to in order to make it understandable. So she said everything was gender all along. It's a typical post-structuralist, postmodernist idea. Everything is fluid, everything is language, nothing really exists, nothing is material, everything is just a matter of how we think, how we speak, the discourse around it, right? Queer theory, however, said that since there is nothing, nobody can really be anything, right? So you can't say you are a woman, but you also can't say that a trans woman is a woman because nobody is anything, right? That's queer theory. Queer theory is like playing with things all along, like making performance, like constantly subverting. Now, so from sex and gender to gender came something very interesting, which is gender identity theory or trans theory, where the fluidity stops. In gender identity theory, there are things that are fixed. It's just that gender and sex have changed places. So what we're now told is that what's real, what exists, but is material, is the gender identity you have. We're told that you're born with your gender identity. But what is a social construct, we're told, is the body. So we're told that sex, that's a construct. In fact, they even say sex assigned at birth, as if, just were handed out sexes at random at birth. Like, you take this sex, you take that, oh, I got it wrong, I'll just change it, They don't even acknowledge the fact that sex as such exists. So everything that we said was a social construct, namely stereotypes, gender roles, pink, cars, all that has now become the real. Whereas everything that we said was the real, the body, menstruation, and so on, has now become the construct that you can change, that you can just switch if you want to. And if now your brain and your body have different ideas about what gender you are, the brain is right and the body is wrong. So the brain has to change the body. So there's this dualism between brain and body. Am I making sense, or is it really complicated? Because I'm feeling like I'm even losing myself sometimes. I'm trying to make sense of this theory. I'm trying to follow it. And sometimes it's not exactly coherent. But the point here is that they have taken feminist understanding, feminist terminology, feminist language, and switched it around. That's why we recognize so many of the things they're saying, but they come in the wrong order. That's why when we talked about things like, social constructs or breaking down the norms or, down with gender. We hear the same things, but in the wrong order. So what's really happening here in the second layer of the theory is the re-establishing of stereotypes, but now as the basis for the definition of sex, right? So let's go on. So now in the first layer, it was all about diversity, tolerance, and the second layer, it's about, blue or pink, cars or dolls. Now comes something interesting in the third layer, which is when we're going to apply this theory. Lots of states have, just in the past 10 years, at an amazing speed, changed laws around sex and gender identity. So all of a sudden, in a lot of countries, now anybody who wants to can go and identify as a man or a woman without any surgical or medical intervention and get that recognized in law, in the passport, right? So just think about how long it took for women to get the right to vote, or to get the right to anything. How long it took for gay people to get the right even not to be considered, criminals. And how fast this has happened, And now when we're going to apply this theory, and we see here that any man now can identify as a woman, right? We're seeing that, for example, in female sports, men are entering female sports, often winning. A mediocre man who is at place like 400 something in swimming and nobody would know his name as a man, we wouldn't even know who that person was, can go into women's swimming and win. Same in cycling, same in boxing, same in weightlifting. All of these mediocre males who we didn't even know about, all of a sudden are winning in women's sports. We're seeing that men who commit very typical male crimes, such as rape, abuse of women, child pornography, all of a sudden are identifying as women and getting put into women's prisons and being treated as women by the media. And I want to read to you a case which is very typical of how this is working structurally. Okay, so in December 2018, in Sweden, there was a lot of media speaking about a woman who was convicted of child pornography possession. So she had like 13,600 images and videos of children being raped. And it was like extremely violent child pornography. So the prosecutor was interviewed and commented on that it's really unusual for a woman to commit this kind of crime, but here we have an example and it shows that women are also doing this and it's not just a male thing. On the internet, on forums, a lot of men were saying like, who is this interesting woman? We want to meet her. And it turned out, of course, that this individual was in fact a man. He was even registered as a man at the time that the crime was committed. And this, the media did not say. I had to find like some Russian sensational tabloid who was investigating the case to figure out. I was calling the tax authorities to ask if he'd changed the sex. I had to call 3 times. The first 2 times they said, oh, this is sensitive, we're not going to tell you. And the third time I got somebody else on the line and they did tell me that this was a man at the time of committing the crime. And this man not only was a man who was downloading child pornography, it was a man who was, even if you apply stereotypes, a very typical kind of man. So he was a military. He had a career in the armed forces. He was a far-right nationalist. I mean, he had a lot of characteristics that, if you would apply stereotypes and say, what is a man, what is a woman, you would say that's a man. All of these characteristics, typically male. Now, he said he's a woman, so he is a woman, right? How does that apply to the old idea in the book of jazz that I like pink, so I'm a girl, I like dolls, I'm a girl? All of a sudden, that layer is also gone. In the third layer, we understand that in reality, when this theory is applied to reality, sex is a man's domain. So men can decide what sex they are and what sex we are. Can we do the same thing? Can I say, oh, I'm a man and I get treated as a man? Now here comes the asymmetry. if I'm going to decide that I'm a man and compete in men's sports, first of all, I'm not going to win. I'm not going to get anywhere. And we all know that, right? Second of all, if I try to take testosterone, that will be doping and that will be illegal. So whereas men have a chance to get into women's sports, we don't have a chance to get into their sports. How about prisons? Everybody's talking about trans women in prisons. Why is nobody talking about trans men in male prisons? Because nobody wants to go there. Of course, why would they want to go? And this is the interesting difference between a woman identifying as a man and a man identifying as a woman. Now, if I identify as a man, I can get the passport maybe, but it doesn't help because men are not going to treat me as a man anyway. So if I go to a men's prison or a men's changing room and I say, oh, don't sexually harass me because I'm actually a man, we all know that nobody's going to care. We all know that they're going to say, we don't care, you look like a woman and you are a woman to me, so I'm going to go ahead, right? If I change my sex to a man, does that mean that I get to be prime minister, that I get to have a male salary, that I get a male job? I was trying to find that out. And it turned out that during the whole year of 2020, I found lots of examples of the first transgender politician in all the world. All of them were trans women. Not one of them was trans man. So to change sex for a woman into a man doesn't seem to get her into the man's club. It doesn't seem to get her male privilege. It doesn't seem to get her anywhere. Most of the articles about trans men were about a trans man being pregnant or a trans man having her period, which is very typical female things. But they weren't about trans men succeeding anywhere, about trans men, breaking barriers, right? So this is all very interesting. Most articles of marriages, when it came to somebody transitioning late in life, were about men, married men who had kids, transitioning to become female and had a wife who supported her in her journey. Now, was there any example of a woman transitioning to becoming a man and having her boyfriend supporting him and now deciding that he's gay? Because of course, if she's now man, I am gay. Not a single example what I found. So we see that there's an asymmetry here. What ends up becoming is that we end up getting a structure where we have open female spaces and closed male spaces. So this is the end result of this theory. Maybe as feminists, we could have accepted this if it turned out to mean more opportunities for women. If it meant really that nobody knew who was a woman and who was a man and we could just make it in the man's world because nobody could say who was who, it doesn't seem that that's happening. It seems that what's happening is our spaces are being opened, our sports, our shelters, our organizations, our prisons, our changing rooms, everything that's female is being opened, whereas the male category keeps on being closed. And why is that? Because what protects the female category are laws and rules and names, whereas what protects the male category is power, informal networks, and violence, right? And nobody seems to be interested in changing that. The whole debate around trans people is about trans women's access to women's things, not about trans men's access to men's things. When they speak about trans inclusion in sports, do they ever speak about how it's going to be for trans men in male sports? Do they ever say, we need a quota here? We need to make it so that everybody on Barça, on Inter, on PSG are going to have like 2 trans men on the team. Just imagine if we suggested that. We want trans-included sports, so we want all the different football teams to have a quota for trans men. They would never accept that. So all the discussion is about how trans women are going to be included in women's. All the question is, what is a woman? Nobody's talking about what is a man. Nobody's questioning the category of man. Nobody's questioning men. When we are speaking, for example, of prisons, right? We had a case in Sweden. It was a guy called Christopher Johansson, I think. He killed his ex-girlfriend, who was from Thailand, and he cut her into pieces and hid her in the forest. And after that, he pretended he didn't know where she was, and he was searching for her, right? Oh, somebody's falling asleep here. Oh. I'm not going to take it as an insult. So he was convicted. He was put into a male's prison. In prison, he changed and he said, I am now a woman. We don't have evidence that he actually had an operation or anything. Maybe he took some hormones, but that was it, we think, from the reports we have. He was transferred to a female prison. Now, in the debate around that, we're told that trans women are at risk in males' prisons for rape, abuse, and so on. So they need to come to female prisons. Nobody is debating the fact, is challenging the fact that males are violent in the males' prison, right? Nobody's saying, well, men, you got to stop being violent. You got to stop this. Nobody is saying to the men, you can't be beating up women or trans people, stop that. Nobody's even asking them to be tolerant. So this tolerance is only being asked of women. Now, if he's moved to a female prison and the female inmates complain, they are told they should be tolerant, they should accept him. If they protest, that's literal violence and it could kill people, right? So male violence is just taken for granted. That's okay. They are just like that. They can go on being that way. But if we say something, if we have an opinion, we are responsible for somebody's death, suicide, whatnot, right? So there's definitely double standards in how we're treating the issue here, right? Yeah, so I wanted to bring up some of the discrepancies in the gender identity theory. I don't know if you could actually call it a theory because it's so incoherent. When you try to follow the theoretical models, it changes all the time. For example, some of the things that are being said, that gender identity is a colonial concept. Have you heard this one? It's a colonial concept in so many cultures back in the days. They didn't have binary gender. Okay, first of all, sex and gender are two different things. Sex, as long as human beings have existed, has always been a fact. Cultures did know how to make babies before colonialization, obviously, otherwise they wouldn't be here, right? There might have been different concepts of gender, but mind you, patriarchy is 6,000 years old. And it's basically worldwide. There have been examples of some cultures that have survived in a matrilinear or maybe even more equal state, but generally worldwide, we've had patriarchy for 6,000 years. It predates colonialism. So most of the religions, most of the structures are very patriarchal in the world, right? Usually those other concepts of gender refer to homosexuality, especially among males, as a way to internalize the unaccepted. They do not refer to fluid gender. It wasn't like nobody knew what gender was until colonialism came, right? One other interesting topic that we always hear in online debates, especially, trans women are women. Okay, so according to this theory, trans doesn't exist, right? This is like, I think, the main contradiction of gender identity theory. If trans women are women, then they're not trans women, and then trans doesn't exist, right? So, because then it's just women are women, right? So, also, if trans women are women then automatically trans women? No. And that is the interesting thing, right? So there is something called a trans woman who gets to have their own identity, their own oppression, their own groups, their own discussions, where we're told we don't know what it feels like, so we can't go there. But they can also be in our group and they know how we feel because they're the same as us, but we're not the same as them, right? How symmetrical is that? You know, and then we're told if we say, no, we don't believe that trans women are women because the trans, in the trans woman, what does that mean? What means trans? It means you were born a male, so that means something, right? If it means something to you, it means something to me, right? It can't just mean something to you and nothing to me, right? So then they say, no, because you can't just reduce women to biology. Have you heard that one? You can't reduce women to biology because women is so much more than that. Okay, so what about their term cis woman? What does that mean? What does cis woman mean? What is that group cis women? It's the exact same group as the one we mean when we say women. It's the biological women, right? So they do base something on biology. They do have a word for us in our biology. It's just that it's called cis woman, but it's the exact same group. So why have a new word? Well, this is the interesting thing. And I think this is where it comes to like the whole, what is the point of renaming us, right? Because women, for the longest time, right? When I looked up at the end of my book, I write that if you look up woman in historical archives, you know, from the Bible and onwards, you see that woman is something that is described by men. And it's something that they don't like very much, that they don't respect very much. You know, in the Old Testament, she appears as a support and as a comfort to man. She's called woman because she was taken out of man, it says. She's erased from history in the Old Testament in long lists where it's said that men have begat their sons on their own. Abraham begat Isaac, Isaac begat Jacob, Jacob begat Judas. No mention of the women who actually gave birth to these people. In the Indian Rig Veda, it's stated that woman's intellect has little weight. And also that hearts of hyenas are the hearts of women. For Aristotle, woman is a deformed man. For Martin Luther, she's a creature who ought to keep seated because she has wide hips. You know, the socialists and anarchists are not better. For Proudhon, the anarchist, she's so inferior to the man that she's worth 8 out of 27. I don't know how he came to that number. So it's very kind of disheartening to search for woman in old historical texts, right? But then, you know, at the end of the 18th century, something happens. Women start to reclaim the word woman, right? So women are starting to organize. Women are starting to organize for their rights, to be heard, to be included in democracy. You had the first international conference in 1878 by French women. And men also joined the cause. And so the word woman begins to change. So at the beginning of the 20th century, the word woman, if you search in historical texts, it often appears related to the women's votes movement, the suffragists, right? And what then happens is, if you look at it from a power relationship, you see that the word woman used to be a tool of patriarchy. And women took that word and we said, now this word is ours. This word has a different meaning. It doesn't mean an inferior, incomplete human being with no intellect. Woman means an oppressed subject with the right to revolt. That's what woman means. So the word woman now is our tool. We own this word. This word has power. Right? And woman had thus, to speak in Marxist terms, become a group that does not merely exist in itself, but for itself. It means that women up until then, we had shared and common conditions, but we weren't aware of them. Now we were aware. We had class consciousness as women. We knew that we were women. We knew that we were oppressed. We knew that it was unfair. We knew that men were oppressing us and that we had the right to do something about it. So at the end of last century, around 20 years ago, it seemed that there was very little that patriarchy could do because we had all the tools, we had the weapons directed upwards, so they couldn't press us down. Now, what happens to a tool or a weapon when it's not useful? You throw it away. So from the viewpoint of patriarchy, woman is no longer a useful tool. So let's get rid of it because woman is our word, so they don't need it anymore. So instead, what is being done now it's not coming from above. It's coming from what it looks like below. We were not prepared. We didn't know it was going to come from below. We were always looking above, to the big conservative patriarchy that was oppressing us. But now it's coming from here, and we were not ready. So they're not saying, you are inferior, you should sit down and shut up. They're saying, we are more oppressed than you. You have to listen to us. Of course, I don't want to be an oppressor. So it was our weak spot. So what is being done with this word woman is, it's being fragmented, it's being picked apart, it's being chopped into pieces, it's being reduced to body parts, menstruator, cervix haver, uterus bearer, whatnot. It's made to include its opposite. So woman now also means trans woman, which means man, so it means both. So, it doesn't mean anything really. It's added prefixes like cis woman. It's being labeled problematic. The ones who use this word are being defamed and boycotted. So there is this war against the word woman, which is in no way waged against the word man. The word man is being left completely alone. Now, in whose interest is it that there is a war against this word woman? Is it in our interest? No, because this word was ours. We had reclaimed it. We had it. We knew what it meant. So when we are being told that we should change this word for cis women, now what does cis woman mean? I have a chapter of this cis woman. Okay, so before we used to be women, which meant an oppressed class with a right to revolt. Now we're being told we should now call ourselves cis women. If you look at official definition, for example, Swedish Secretariat for Gender Research, it says that a central feature of the position of a cis person is that it's often associated with cultural conceptions of normal, natural, and healthy, and is a position which entails many privileges. So instead of becoming oppressed, now we are privileged. Do you understand? So how are we going to organize now? How are we going to organize as women? And I think that's the main thing. And that's why this question is so important now. Because if we organize as women, we're told you must include trans women and their perspectives, which means we must include men, which means that women and men should fight together, which means we cannot have our separate understanding of our own sex and our own situation and our own problems, right? If we are told we should organize as cis women, it sounds like we're a bunch of millionaires. It sounds like it's, Bill Gates and George Soros hanging around in a club. Cis women are now on the street fighting. I mean, what is that? Really? And so they are saying, yeah, women are oppressed, but the most oppressed woman is the trans woman, meaning the man, right? So the most oppressed woman is a man, and the woman who's a woman is privileged, right? So they've turned everything around. And it's coming from below. We didn't expect it from there, so we don't have the defense. We have to reorganize. We have to regroup. We have to have new language to defend ourselves from this type of attempt to undermine the women's movement. Because if we don't have the word woman, how can we have a woman's consciousness, a woman's movement, speak about women's issues? It's very clear that all the questions where we have fought as women, for example, the right to talk about menstruation and taboo, are exactly the issues where we're told we should not speak about women. So I think it's very clear when we hear nowadays a question about menstruation. Then we hear, all genders are menstruating. Oh, I have a great example of that, actually. From Tampax, I think. Okay, so Tampax in 2020, they said, we're going to stop using the word woman and we're going to speak about people who bleed. So they declared fact. That's also interesting. They always say like fact, like it's not an opinion, like it's fact. Fact. Not all women have periods. Yeah, we know that. Also a fact, not all people with periods are women. Let's celebrate the diversity of all people who bleed. Okay, great. And then a couple of weeks later, they have another Instagram post which said, people with periods can do everything men can do, but do it better and while bleeding. Okay, wait. So you have people with periods on one hand, on the other hand, you have men. So there is one person that's unnameable, unspeakable. You cannot say who this person is, but it's the opposite of the word man, which you can say, which is a sex. And the one who you cannot say is the one who bleeds. So really now, is this about celebrating diversity, or is it about erasing the word woman? Right? Because the word man is obviously not being erased, right? Another debate where this is happening, the same female erasure, is the debate around abortion. We have lost battles around abortion in Poland and in the US, and I think partly because the organizations that were going to fight for women's rights to abort didn't dare to use the word woman. So if you can't even name the subject that's oppressed, how the hell can you fight for us? So instead of having people standing up and saying, this is a war on women, this is a war on 52% of the population, and we're not going to accept this, you have spokespeople standing up and saying, not only women need abortions, people of all genders need abortions, and it targets LGBTQ, people of color, and so on and so forth, without mentioning the big group that actually needs abortions. So if you can't name us, you can't fight for us. I don't think it's a coincidence that we're losing these battles at the exact same time as we can't name the group that we're talking about. And I think this is the end result of all this. We're going to keep on losing battles. We're going to lose the battles we already won because we can't name us. So instead of speaking out, we're going to have this muddled type of language where it's like, we're talking about a group, but we don't really know which group it is. But anyway, like the people that need this are in danger. You're not going to win a battle like that. It's like as if Black Lives Matter couldn't say black. There's lives matter, right? It's like, we don't say that it's about skin color. It's just about, whatever who you want to identify with. Anyway, those lives matter. Of course, that wouldn't work. You have to know who you are. If you're oppressed, you have to name yourself. And that's another chapter that I have that's really interesting. Why is it only women that are being erased in this sense, right? Why is it only the subject of sex that's going into postmodern times? We're not told that you can be whatever class you are. We're not told that you can be whatever race you are. We're not told you can be whatever age you are, right? But we're told you can be whatever sex you are. So I'm thinking, why does that happen? Why does it happen with sex? Maybe it's going to happen with the other categories too. But I came to the conclusion that why they're doing this with sex is because sex is the one thing that you actually can't change, right? Because the other categories of oppression, like race and class, these things are not as fixed as sex in a sense. Because race, it does exist objectively, but you can be from a lot of different races at the same time. You can also have a society like colonial Spanish America where you had like 50 different races, you know, depending on what type of mixture you were. If you were 1/4, if you were 1/8, you were 1/16, and so on. You had different names for all that. You had criollos, you had mestizos, you had all these things. Or you can have a society that says just black and white. Or you can have a society where you don't even know what race is. That is technically possible. There is no difference between the races in terms of bodily needs or functions. The same with class. It is perfectly possible to imagine a society where there was no class, right? It can happen. But sex as a biological reproductive function is always going to exist. And because of that, they know that there is no danger if they take away the word woman, that all of a sudden they're not going to be women anymore. They know that we're still going to be there. They know we're still going to give birth. We're still going to have our period. We're still going to do the housework. We're still going to love them more and get less back. We're still going to be so nice to everybody who, puts their foot on our head. They know that we're still going to be there. So it's okay, they can take away our name. They don't need it. We need it. So I think that's a really important question. We cannot let go of the name woman. We cannot say, oh, it's okay, I don't care, you can have it. Yeah, you can have it, and next we have none of the victories we want anymore because they're all gone. So I'm gonna stop there. I've written a lot more things that I wanted to say, but I want to open a discussion and hope that you will have contributions, things to say. And remember, we are against the system. We're not against people. Maybe some of our enemies are threatening us, wanting to boycott us, wanting to cancel us. We don't do that. We like debate. We are for people, and we're against the system. And we like freedom of speech and to talk about things because that's how we think that society should advance.
So I will. Are there any questions?
Or comments or reflections,
comments, yes.
Or you don't have to ask a question.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for your talk. I was reminded towards the end, there was one a conservative theorist in the US, and she was actually attacking the transgender movement. And I found her arguments really interesting. I can't remember her name, I'm sorry. But what was interesting for me, that this was a way to attack also the abortion, the same organizations that were supporting abortion. So it was kind of double agenda in the attack. So yeah, so what you're doing is your critique is different.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I want to say something about that, the difference between the conservative position and the feminist position on sex and gender, and the difference between gender identity. Okay, in a simplified way. So, conservatives think that that sex precedes gender. So they think if you are a girl, you must act like a girl, right? If you are a boy, you must act like a boy. Transgender identity theorists think the same, but the opposite. They think if you act like a girl, you are a girl. If you act like a boy, you are a boy. Feminists, we don't see gender at all as an imperative. We want to do away with that. We think you are just your body, but you can be in any way you want. The body doesn't have a personality. That's our approach. So whereas conservatives see sex and then gender, and the trans see gender and then sex, we just see sex and we want to do away with gender. We're against connecting personality types to bodies, right? In a simplified way. And that's the total opposite. We believe that the conservatives and the gender identity theorists have a lot more in common than what they have with us.
Thank you for your talk. I appreciate your work a lot. I wanted to say I risk sounding like a huge conspiracy theorist, but the same culprit that was pushing for prostitution and legalization, Amnesty International, is again pushing for self-ID in our parts of the world. And I would like to ask, what is there to do? Because obviously this is the cause with the money behind it. And we are being threatened, you will lose your job, you will be ostracized if you express your opinion. We have to be quiet. What is there to do? What is the next step? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, look, they were smart, the lobbyists, both, the pro-prostitution lobbyists and the gender identity industry lobbyists were smart because they got people into Amnesty. We should have done the same. I don't know why we're not there. We should get into all these organizations and make public policy, or found our own organizations that can compete with them. I don't know what is easier, But I think we made a mistake in leaving Amnesty when they took the pro-prostitution position, because if we leave, then there's only them left. So the problem is that Amnesty, for example, has relied a lot on the sex industry lobbyists, like one, for example, in Mexico, that they quoted in their statement why they are for decriminalization of sex purchase. And who was behind that? It was a pimp that's now convicted to 15 years in jail in Mexico for pimping. Who was the one making the policy for that organization that Amnesty quoted? So you see, they have been relying on a lot of lobbyists, but it's also because they managed to put their people in those organizations. So I just think they're really smart. They know where to place the people, how to frame arguments. We feminists need to do the same thing or we're going to be run over. So I think the worst thing we can do now is just, retreat from the world. I know it's really hard to be out there because when you're out there, you receive so many hits. So we need to be together. We need to support each other on this, not go alone. Have a strategy, go in there with other people and try to change their policy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Kajsa, for being with us here today. So I have a comment and a question, actually. So my comment is, everything you are saying to us actually makes so much sense with this one example that we have today in USA, and that is Dylan McClain. Yeah, I think that's the name. So there is a guy who is a guy, and he's actually a performer. So the whole gender thing that he is preaching kind of makes you doubtful about his motives. But he's portraying women as an imbeciles. But I mean really imbecile. So he's now like a person who is chosen to present women in sport for Nike, and he's portraying women as ridiculous, and it's absurd. So that's my comment. But what I really wanted to say is that now we have this whole climate in world where the women's rights, as we know it, as the original feminists kind of saw it, are defended by traditionalists, by conservatives. And I think that is really, do you think that is really a true issue here? Because we have this woke and liberal and free-minded people who are actually defending the whole idea of the gender who is based, and sex as a biology thing doesn't exist. And if you say that it exists, you are a bigot, you are a TERF, you are every bad word under the sun. So do you think that we can actually, there is a way for a feminist community, a women community, to come together and stop this madness? Because it is absurd and it is madness.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And I think your first comment, your first example shows that, femininity can be very profitable for a male, but not so much for a female. And I think that shows patriarchy's double standard. Some time ago, it was popular, even in feminist circles, to say, there's one role for woman and there's one role for man, and both are oppressed in patriarchy. Okay, why that doesn't apply is because a woman usually, to generalize, is punished when she complies and when she doesn't comply. And she's punished in both ways. If she does what she's supposed to, oh, you're ignored. If you go against, oh, you're too much, go away, right? And this goes in like a lot of different examples. So a man can be rewarded when he complies with the traditional stereotype and when he goes against them. You see, and this is a very typical example of that. So he is so praised because he goes against the male role, right? Which kind of goes against the theory that males are so punished if they go against the male role in a sense. Maybe they are in a small village, but on a global scale, when it comes to, as you're saying, sponsorships and things, this is a positive thing. Whereas I doubt that they would give the same sponsorship to a trans man, for example. So if it was about trans inclusion, you would have a trans man, it'd be a different thing, but it's never about that. About your question, I think the danger is that when the conservative backlash comes against the gender identity movement, it's going to bring down feminism as well, because they're going to tell us that we were the ones that let that happen. And they're going to associate us with that. So, for example, the fight for abortion is going to be associated with a gender identity movement. You know, the fight, for example, to speak about menstruation is going to be associated with that. So in the long run, because the conservatives are a lot more and a lot more powerful, you know, they're going to take down all of it. So if we had women's studies at universities, it was renamed gender studies. Gender studies was okay at first. Then it became all about, you know, postmodern or post-postmodern queer and trans theory. Then it's going to be taken down because the right wing are going to say, look at this is stupidity. You see? So that's the danger. So that's why we have to stay, I think, true to our line, stay as where we were as classical feminists, and just, you know, ride this one out and hope that we get out on the other side.
You. Okay, so I have 2 points. When you mentioned that you haven't heard about biological women in male sports, I've heard about one example. It's Skylar Baylor. It's a swimmer in the United States, and it's a female that identifies as a male. And there was an interview with Skylar, and that person said, actually, their aim or goal was not to be the last in races. So basically, this person was like second from the last in one race. And, you know, it was really defeating to hear a female actually, you know, men are going after the win. You know, they're going after the victory. And female are just going after, okay, I'll be happy if I'm not the last one. So that's the first one. The second one, as you, when you said cis was denoting our biology, I wouldn't agree 100% with it, because cis women only encompasses women that are not identifying as trans, whereas the terms that are actually for women, for our biology, are menstruator, vagina haver, uterus haver, etc., etc. So basically, those even worse, dehumanizing terms. So those are just my comments.
Yeah, you're right. But, you know, as we said, like, you know, maybe some women don't have menstruation. So what are we then? Like, if we are not menstruators, you know, how can we name ourselves? I mean, that is the big problem. Is there any name that we can use? Yeah, I guess that would be like the only encompassing thing. But if we claim, if we base our terminology on biology, then we would claim that trans men are women too. Maybe they had bottom surgery, so they don't have vagina. So how can we include them? You know, and I'm still going to stick to the word woman. I think that in this new linguistic economy, what they have made is an economy where there's no place for a woman to speak as an oppressed person. Because as a cis woman, she's not oppressed, she's privileged. As a trans man, oh, you have male privilege, right? So how can you speak as an oppressed person? You know, and when you said about sports, I think, you know, when Simone de Beauvoir, she wrote The Second Sex, it was like, wait, we're going to get back at you, but we just have to think out how. Right? Mm-hmm. So they waited and waited, and then they thought, you know what? You were the second sex, but you're not even going to be that. We are going to be the first and the second sex. So you won't even be the second sex. You'll be the second of the second sex. So you have the male sports where the men are winning. You have the female sports, the men are winning. And we're going to be the second in the second sports. And smile, because you have to smile. If you don't smile, you're transphobe. So the woman who's losing, yeah, she was training all her life to get there. And she's losing to a mediocre male who was number 400, and she has to smile. You know, I mean, is there anything more patriarchal than that? If you don't smile, you know, at your own oppression, you know, we will just obliterate you. And this makes me furious. I don't know how anybody with the slightest feminist consciousness cannot be furious at this. I don't know the women that are saying, I don't care about sports anyway. It's not so important, you know. I don't know, where is their feminist consciousness? Where is it coming from? Do they not have anything left? Or maybe they're just trying to survive. Maybe they're scared and they're thinking like, I just have to say this, otherwise, you know, they will ruin my career.
Ima li još pitanja?
Thank you, Kajsa, very much for very inspiring talk. I maybe need some help with my English in public because, you know. I want to tell us something about political level you mentioned at the beginning of talk between, you know, this alliance of neoliberal right and postmodern so-called left. You know, before we know we have NGOs for women rights, we have left parties as support. But now what we have, what we can do on political level to fight for women's rights. You know, I'm talking like ex-feminist activist in a political party and in organization who are now, you know, pro-gender everything. You talked about. So I really need some comment from you on that topic.
You mean like on the governmental level,
Yes,
like in the parliament?
Governmental level and any activist level. You know, we have NGOs for women rights with those agenda. You know,
Yeah.
we have. It's very, very, very hard to act.
Try to go in there. Is the camera on? Try to go in there, a lot of you that have the same position. And then when you are majority, you can change their policy. You know, I mean, because, you know, our mistake is we went alone, like kamikaze. We went one by one, like, hello, I just think, and then we were just cut down. So I think my lesson anyway is, you know, next time we will go together, go into an organization and make sure that they defend the rights of women. Because, you know, the thing is that the trans activists, when they go against you, they always go against one person. They always pick one person. They don't go against like a whole group. They will go all of them against one person until they shut you down. Then they will go for the next person. So they always have the strategy, go a lot of people against one person. When that happens, they isolate one person. They create this fear around that person. So nobody wants to associate because they think it's going to happen to me. So nobody's supporting. So I think the important thing is that we know that happens. We go together, we stick together. The Spanish feminists are great at that. The Spanish feminists, when they attack one, oh my God, they get thousands of them against, like, boom, you know, they come like bees, like, so, you know, the trans activists are kind of have to back down. So they are really solidaric, you know, they don't let anybody go there alone. And maybe, I think it's also because they have WhatsApp groups. So all the feminists have WhatsApp groups and they're posting, help me out on Facebook. Come to this thread, everybody's going there. Help me out here, you know, let's all go to this meeting. You know, they all go together. So it shows strength, you know. Yeah.
Još pitanja? Oprost.
Do you think that it's really worth it to fight on social media? Because we are thinking that maybe it's a good idea to go off social media and speak
And where
about
would you go instead?
real public, real spaces. Yeah, like, okay, we are trying, not on a good track right now, but it will be better. We think that it's better to that discussion put in public.
But do you mean like public events like this?
Yeah.
With them or
because
alone?
on social media there are a lot of fake profiles. They may make fake profiles to insult you and to leave really, really bad comments, and it's really terrifying. I mean, there are like threats of violence, sexual violence, different images. Oh, it's really, really hard when you're on social media, and they are like organized. They when they're one comment, like gender critical comment, they're like coming in many of them with insults and everything. So I'm just thinking, is it worth it to be on social media when it's that atmosphere?
Yeah, I know it's not discussion. I mean, I think social media is too important to be left alone because, you know, a lot of young people, that's how they learn about politics. So if all they see is that, then, you know, they're not going to know that you exist. But I think maybe choose your battles. Maybe if, like, you are 10 people, you decide, let's do this one. Maybe you do it on your own account. On your own account, you have power. You can, you know, take away the comments that are really hateful and hurtful. Maybe don't go to their account because on their account, they have the power. So, you know, or if you go to their account, you decide, okay, we do it now at 7 o'clock. So you all go. You don't wait and somebody's sleeping for 24 hours and then, you know, you're all alone there. So, you know, plan it maybe. And I think another arena that's really important, the political arena, lobbying to politicians is very important. Literary, you know, to write books, because on social media, it disappears. Yeah. You do a lot of work and then it's gone. If you write a book, you know, it's still like, it stays, you know? So that's very important as well. The public arena is important, but it's not as important as it used to be, you know? Maybe it's important just to meet, to feel the strength, to feel the solidarity, not so much in terms of convincing others, maybe.
Yeah, but it's really important for that solidarity because I usually have that sense that we are dehumanized. I mean, they speak of us like we deserve worst. I mean, it's really, I don't know, we should really be supportive for each other. I mean, because this is hard. I mean, for mental health also. So, okay, that's it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's crazy because a lot of the time it's coming from other women, other feminists that you didn't think were capable of that type of abuse and of not engaging in a debate, of not speaking to you as a human being. I think that's really historically new. And I think it also shows that this battle is important. I wrote down another thing I just want to say before, like another kind of myth or something that people say, like, oh, it's just a few people. Have you heard that? Oh, it's just a few. A lot of males in the left wing, they will tell me, why you care about that? You know, when I was going to write this book, they told me, don't do that. Why? You should write about climate change or, you know, the war or something like that. This is just a few people, you know? And I'm like, well, you know, it's not a few people. It's about legislation. It's about changing the laws, you know? And then, for example, I said, you know about the guy who went to prison and he changed his sex and he went to a woman's prison? Oh, that's just one person. And then I thought, okay, so a few is important or a few is not important. So we have to decide on this matter before we decide, because when they say that this guy is going to change from male to female prison, he's also a few. He's one person. Why they have to change a law because of him? They can leave him there. It's okay. No. Then he's one person, very important. Oh, it's one person. Oh, think of him. But all of a sudden, when it's the women affected in the women's prison, oh, it's just a few. So a few is important or not? You know, that's the question. Like, I think a few males seems to be very important, but a few women are not important. So we have to throw that question back. Why are you changing the laws in a whole country? Why are you changing the language just for a few people? Why are you changing everything in the culture? Why are companies changing the way they speak just for a few people? Then it's not really a few, is it? You know, so then the question is to them, why is this a big debate? It's not to us. And another thing that I hear a lot is like, oh, that's a cult, you know, that's a sect. Even feminists say that. Oh, that's a sect. They're just crazy. They're in their own bubble. No, it's not. This is hegemony. This is like on governmental level. This is companies. This is governments. This is, you know, big organizations like the UN and NGOs changing their language. It's not a small sect like Jehovah's Witness, you know. Maybe people are acting like a sect, but this is really a hegemonic change in how we as societies are going to look at the definition of sex. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm just thinking because somebody mentioned Amnesty International, and you comment that maybe we shouldn't leave those organizations who are betraying basic feminist principles. But I think that it is impossible to work in that environment because their position is really on their position on prostitution and surrogacy and gender identity is profitable, and they will not change their agenda and their position because if a few of us is in the organization, they will just we will just get fired because they are doing that. But I think that a good alternative to that would be to self-organize and to make stronger social movements who can be loud and who can be visible and to connect with other feminists organizations who are on the line. Because I think that it's impossible to even work in international organizations now, in the UN, any international organization, because they're on the liberal position especially to gender identity.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Sometimes you can find a local chapter where there are not so many people. And if you can, for example, the Swedish section of Amnesty International, they did not support the decriminalization of sex purchase. So they voted against. And I think you can find sometimes a local chapter that doesn't have so many people. You still get to use their name, but it's just a few people. I mean, I just think their strategy has been so successful. It's like the Yoga Karta principles. Everybody thinks that's some kind of UN document. It's just some people that met somewhere and decided something and principles. That's a really successful strategy. You make yourself look like an official organization when you're not. You blow yourself up, you make yourself look like so many people when it's just a few people. You make it look official when it's not official. You connect it to a big name. So yeah, if we can form organizations that can compete with them, that's good. If we can't, maybe we can, try to lobby within in some places, not in the big structure, but in the small chapters maybe. Because sometimes when you look at NGOs, people have a lot of respect for them, but locally, it can be anybody who joins these. It's like when they make a report about a country and then you look at who was actually there in that country. Oh, it's like 3 upper-class people that are sitting there and they're, directing policy.
Ima li još pitanja? Evo, skroz za. Neka ne.
Thank you for the lecture. It was really provoking because I found myself in the position of this first group of people you mentioned, that it's okay to just choose what you want to be. So, okay, this opened some questions for me also, so thank you for this. And I wanted to ask this kind of gender identity stream in politics also, how do you think it is connected to social media? In a way that our life goes more into virtual, and I think it's easy to then get disconnected from what body is and what is sex. And in this virtual space, I think it's really easy to switch gender and sex to, as you defined it, as something that is given and something that can be chosen. So and I'm thinking about this in this term of technocracy also and transhumanism. So for me, this is more of a symptom of this, not just this, but I think that is one of the symptoms of transhumanism. And all those technopolitics and the way how we relate to reality, which is also connected to post-truth. As you said, there are some institutions that seem to be institutions, but actually they are just group of people to pretend to have legitimacy. So I think it's many different levels of the state, of the how to say, of the society we live in. You understand, with this technology, social media, logical social media, where the money is, what is you know, what is the economy in a way, how our psychology now works with social media, what is important, what is just attraction, what is truth, what is their truth, and things like that. So a lot of people, a lot of things you said just like sounded like one of these like niches that can be also seen, as I said, as a symptom of this, like larger transition of humanism to transhumanism. For me, that was just a comment. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. And thank you for that comment, because you actually touch upon something that I have in one chapter of my book, which I didn't speak about. Because, you know, when I wrote this book first, my idea was to write it more the consequences of gender identity theory for women, right, as a class. So, but in the course of this book, I spoke a lot to people who had transitioned. You know, some would call them trans people who actually went through like a medical transition, you know. And, you know, I started realizing something. And this was after like long friendships. And I don't mean interviews of 2 hours and bye-bye. I mean, like, I made friends with people that we met every week for years. So that's at a different level. You get to know and hear different things that you didn't hear before. And that's when I realized that people who transition, trans people, are like victims of this theory as well, and a lot, because they, just like you were saying, are being sold the lie that you can actually change your sex through this online thing, through like having an avatar of a different sex, through having filters that make your face look super feminine. And you think, well, it looks like that now. I could just, you know, fix a couple of things and I will really look like that, you know, and really thinking that it's possible. And the industry is selling them. And I have these quotes from the industry where they're saying like, oh, you can just, you know, take hormones, see how you like it, then switch back. And it doesn't work like that. And the sad thing is that the ones who risk the most in transitioning are young gay males and young girls who are either lesbian or have traumas or psychological problems or are somewhere on the spectrum, right? The heterosexual males who transition when they're already married, they have adult kids, they are like 60 years old, they don't really transition, right? They don't cut things off. They stay intact. So they are okay. They just do the fun stuff. But the ones who really risk everything, who go through all the hormonizations, who become patients for life, who cut off the, you know, sex organ and who have this vaginoplasty that's very often not successful, you know, that you end up with something that's not working and that gives you a lot of problems. You know, the ones that cut off their breasts, the ones that, you know, have infertility, you know, bone problems, voice that will never change back if you change your mind. These are like the gay males and the young girls. So they are really the victims of this industry. And what I think is so cruel is that when everybody's talking about trans people this, trans people that, nobody actually cares about them. Nobody actually cares about them, because I've been sitting, you know, next to these people who are talking to me about how their body is actually functioning after these operations. You know, how their difficulties in having sex. A trans male, for example, he has a beard. He looks like a male on the outside. People can think he's a male, but they cannot create a functioning penis. So as a heterosexual or as a gay, he will have problems. Because most of the time, both gay males and heterosexual women are expecting to see a penis, and there is no penis, right? On the other hand, the gay male who transitions because he wants to be more liked by heterosexual males and pass as a woman, he will realize that, you know, the neovagina is not really working. If he's not dilating all the time, it's going to grow together, and he's, you know, just going to have what he had before. He's not going to have something extra. He's going to have something less than what he had before, to put it in a not so vulgar way. So what I'm trying to say is that when that happens to them, they are left alone. All these allies don't care. All the people who are saying trans people that, they don't care. They don't care about real trans people and the real suffering post-transition. They don't care about the new dysphoria that comes when you already went through everything. You can't get your penis back. You can't get your breasts back. You can't get your voice back. And you're stuck in some middle landscape, because the industry sold you a lie, you know? Because online, you can be the king of the online discourse, but in real life, you know, you end up not fitting in anywhere. Because reality is you can't really change sex. You can change the appearance, but your body is going to keep on fighting that. You know, and if you cut off the testicles of a man, you know, he's not going to produce testosterone. So he's going to have to inject himself with female hormones for the rest of his life. For the rest of his life. So they create patients for the rest of their lives. You know? And then gay people were fighting and lesbian people were fighting against medicalization, against conversion therapy. And what do we have here? You know, what is this? When they speak about LGBTQ clinics, who needs a clinic? You know, it's only the T that needs a clinic. The other don't need a clinic. You know, and they're selling them this like you can be who you really are. It sounds so easy. It sounds so great. You know, the greatest thing is to be an ally. You're not putting your own body on the line. You're not risking anything. You know, and for the trans men, it's really hard. Because for the trans men, they're having the same position in the trans movement as the lesbians had in the gay and lesbian movement. You know, they're kind of like appendix to the trans women. So the trans women are everywhere. The trans men are like, you know, we're coming along and, you know, making the coffee and seeing if we get some of the rights too, which they don't, you know. And then they're as invisibilized. In fact, they're more invisible as men than they were as women, but without access to the feminist movement that should be standing up for them as women. So they are finding themselves in like nowhere land. So their only hope is for like the trans movement to somehow give them something back, which is they're not really delivering. So I think at the end of the day, we're going to see like a lot of them revolting as well. And we're already seeing a lot of people detransitioning because it wasn't what they thought it was. I'm not saying that it's bad for everyone. It works for some people. You know, but there is a lot of things that are never talked about. You know, when it comes to transitioning and the consequences of it.
Okay, we have to finish.
Yeah, so is there a last question or should we just finish off?
You can finish if you want to say something.
No. I think I've been keeping you long enough.
But I thank you again, Kajsa, for this wonderful time with you.